Welcome, dear listener, to a world of gentle mysteries and quiet contemplation. Tonight, we journey to the gaslit streets of Victorian London, where the fog drifts softly through cobblestone lanes and warm light glows from the windows of 221B Baker Street. Picture yourself settling into a comfortable armchair by a crackling fireplace, the scent of pipe tobacco and old books filling the air. Outside, the city sleeps peacefully, while inside, the great detective Sherlock Holmes shares tales of mysteries solved through observation and gentle deduction rather than danger or alarm. Let these soothing stories carry you into restful sleep, as we explore cases where wisdom triumphs quietly, and every puzzle finds its peaceful resolution. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let yourself drift into these calming adventures. The Case of the Vanishing Violinist. It was a particularly tranquil autumn evening when Mrs. Hudson knocked gently upon our door at Baker Street. The rain had been falling steadily all afternoon, creating a melodious percussion against our windows, and I had been contentedly reading by the fire while Holmes examined a curious piece of sheet music through his magnifying glass. "Forgive the intrusion, gentlemen," Mrs. Hudson said in her characteristically soft manner, "but there's a young lady downstairs who seems quite distressed. She's asking for Mr. Holmes's assistance with what she calls a most peculiar disappearance." Holmes set down his magnifying glass with a gentle precision that marked all his movements and smiled warmly. "By all means, Mrs. Hudson, please show her up. Watson and I were just discussing the therapeutic qualities of music, and perhaps this case will provide us with a practical demonstration." A few moments later, Mrs. Hudson returned with a young woman of perhaps 25 years, with kind eyes and elegant posture that spoke of musical training. She wore a deep blue velvet coat, slightly damp from the rain, and carried a violin case with obvious care and affection. "Please, miss," Holmes began, gesturing to the chair across from us with welcoming grace. "Pemberton," she replied, settling into the offered chair. "Miss Eleanor Pemberton. I teach violin to children in Kensington, and I perform occasionally with the London Chamber Orchestra." "A noble profession," Holmes observed, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "Music has the power to soothe troubled souls and bring peace to restless minds. Now, tell us about this disappearance that troubles you." Miss Pemberton took a deep breath, her fingers unconsciously mimicking violin fingering positions as she spoke. "It concerns my dear friend and fellow musician, Miss Catherine Whitmore. She's a violinist of exceptional talent, known throughout London for her ability to make even the most complex pieces sound effortless and serene." She paused to gaze out at the rain-kissed window before continuing. "3 days ago, Catherine was scheduled to perform at a private concert for Lord and Lady Ashworth at their estate in Hampstead. It was to be an intimate evening of chamber music, with Catherine as the featured soloist. She had been practicing for weeks, and I had never seen her more prepared or excited about a performance." Holmes leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in that familiar gesture of concentrated attention. "And I presume Miss Whitmore failed to appear for this engagement?" "Not exactly," Miss Pemberton replied, her brow furrowing with puzzlement. "She arrived at the estate precisely on time, carrying her violin and dressed beautifully in a pearl-white gown. The butler admitted her, and several guests saw her in the music room, tuning her instrument and preparing her sheet music. But when Lord Ashworth announced the beginning of the concert and invited everyone to take their seats, she was nowhere to be found," I interjected, beginning to see the mystery. "Precisely, Dr. Watson. The music room was empty except for her violin, which sat carefully placed on the piano bench, still in tune. Her sheet music was neatly arranged, and her coat was hanging properly on the chair. But Catherine herself had simply vanished. Holmes rose slowly and walked to the window, watching the rain create rivulets on the glass. "Tell me, Miss Pemberton, did anyone search the estate thoroughly?" "Oh yes," she replied. "Lord Ashworth was most concerned. He and his staff searched every room, every hallway, the gardens, even the carriage house. There was no trace of Catherine anywhere. It was as if she had simply dissolved into the evening air. And her personal effects, her violin, her music, all left behind, exactly as if she had merely stepped away for a moment. Her handbag was there, containing her usual items, a small mirror, her house keys, and a few coins. Nothing seemed to have been taken or disturbed." Holmes returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful but calm. "Has anyone attempted to contact Miss Whitmore at her home?" "That's perhaps the strangest part of all," Miss Pemberton said, leaning forward slightly. "When Lord Ashworth sent a footman to check on her the following morning, they found her at home, safe and well, tending to her garden as if nothing unusual had occurred." "Ah," Holmes said, and I could see the familiar glimmer of understanding beginning to illuminate his features. "And when questioned about the previous evening?" "She claimed no memory of the concert at all. Catherine insisted she had spent the entire evening at home, practicing and reading. She seemed genuinely confused when told about Lord Ashworth's event and insisted she had never agreed to perform there." The room fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the gentle crackling of the fire and the rhythmic patter of rain. Holmes closed his eyes for a long moment, his breathing deep and even, as if drawing inspiration from some invisible source. "Miss Pemberton," he said finally, "you mentioned that Miss Whitmore had been practicing for weeks. Can you describe her state of mind during this period?" "She was different," Miss Pemberton admitted, her voice growing softer. "Catherine is usually quite social and light-hearted, but in the weeks leading up to the concert, she became increasingly withdrawn. She would practice for hours at a time, often the same piece over and over, with an intensity one had never seen before." "And this piece she was practicing?" "A beautiful but melancholy composition by Bach, the Chaconne from Partita No. 2. It's a piece that demands not only technical skill but deep emotional connection. Catherine once told me that when she played it, she felt as if she were having a conversation with her late father, who had been a musician himself." Holmes nodded slowly, his understanding deepening. "I believe, Miss Pemberton, that your friend Miss Whitmore may have been experiencing what we might call a fugue state, a temporary condition where the mind, overwhelmed by emotion or stress, creates a protective barrier by forgetting certain events or experiences." He rose and moved to his desk, retrieving a small leather-bound notebook. The intensive practice, the emotional weight of the piece she was preparing, and perhaps the pressure of performing for such distinguished guests may have created a perfect storm of anxiety in Miss Whitmore's sensitive musician's soul. "But how does that explain her disappearance from the estate?" I asked, genuinely curious about Holmes's theory. "Elementary, my dear Watson, though deeply human in its complexity," Holmes replied with gentle confidence. "Miss Whitmore arrived at the estate as planned, but as the moment of performance approached, her unconscious mind rebelled against the overwhelming pressure. In her fugue state, she likely left the estate through a garden door or side entrance, walked home in a trance-like state, and her mind simply edited out the entire experience as a form of self-protection." Miss Pemberton's eyes widened with understanding. You mean she forgot the concert because remembering it would have been too painful? Precisely. The human mind is remarkably capable of protecting us from experiences that threaten our emotional well-being. Miss Whitmore's love for music is so pure and deep that the thought of failing to do justice to her father's memory through the Bach piece became unbearable. Holmes returned to his chair, his expression kind and reassuring. I would suggest, Miss Pemberton, that you visit your friend and gently suggest she might benefit from choosing lighter, more joyful pieces for her next performances. Perhaps some Mozart or Vivaldi, composers who celebrated the pure joy of music without demanding such emotional sacrifice from the performer. And should I tell her about the concert at Lord Ashworth's? That decision, I believe, should be left to Miss Whitmore herself. Her mind will reveal the truth when she is ready to handle it. In the meantime, surround her with friendship, understanding, and perhaps suggest some duets. Music is always more healing when shared with a caring friend. Miss Pemberton smiled for the first time since entering our chambers. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I feel as if a great weight has been lifted from my shoulders. Catherine is safe, and now I understand how to help her. As she gathered her coat and violin case to leave, she paused at the door. May I ask how you knew to look for such a gentle explanation? Many would have suspected darker causes. Holmes smiled warmly. In my experience, Miss Pemberton, the human heart seeks harmony above all else. When that harmony is disrupted, it will go to great lengths to restore itself, even if it means temporarily forgetting painful truths. Miss Whitmore's disappearance was not a mystery of malice, but rather a mystery of the soul seeking peace. After Miss Pemberton departed, I found myself reflecting on the elegant simplicity of the solution. Remarkable, Holmes, how you saw past the apparent mystery to the human truth beneath. Indeed, Watson, sometimes the most profound mysteries are not about what we can observe, but about what the heart chooses to remember or forget. Miss Whitmore's violin may have been left behind that evening, but her soul had already found its way home. The rain continued its gentle symphony against our windows as we settled back into our chairs, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, somewhere in London, a talented violinist was tending her garden, her mind at peace, protected by the merciful forgiveness of selective memory. And in our comfortable chambers, two friends sat in contemplative silence, grateful for the gentle mysteries that remind us of the profound complexity and resilience of the human spirit. As the evening deepened and the fire burned lower, I found myself thinking about the therapeutic power of music that Holmes had mentioned earlier. Perhaps, I mused, there was something to be learned from Miss Whitmore's unconscious wisdom, that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is allow ourselves to forget the things that no longer serve our peace of mind, while holding close the melodies that bring joy to our hearts. The mystery of the midnight gardener. The morning fog was just beginning to lift from Baker Street when Dr. Watson and I received our next gentle mystery. Mrs. Hudson brought up our breakfast tray, along with a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery, sealed with lavender wax that carried the faint scent of English gardens. "This arrived with the morning post, Mr. Holmes," she said, setting down our tea with her usual careful attention. The gentleman who delivered it seemed quite earnest, though not at all agitated. He mentioned something about roses blooming at midnight. I examined the elegant handwriting on the envelope before breaking the seal. The letter was written in a flowing script that spoke of education and refinement, and as I read it aloud, Watson leaned back in his chair with the comfortable attention of a man settling in for an intriguing tale. "Dear Mr. Holmes," I began, My name is Professor Edmund Hartwell, and I write to you regarding a mystery that has brought wonder rather than worry to our quiet neighborhood in Bloomsbury. I am a professor of botany at University College London, and I find myself puzzled by events that seem to defy both scientific explanation and common sense, yet cause no harm to anyone involved. Watson raised an eyebrow with interest. A botanical mystery, Holmes. How refreshingly peaceful compared to some of our recent adventures. I continued reading. For the past month, residents of Thornbury Lane have awakened each morning to discover that someone has been tending to their gardens during the night. Not in any destructive manner, mind you, but with extraordinary skill and care. Roses have been pruned to perfection, weeds have been removed with surgical precision, and struggling plants have been lovingly nursed back to health. Most curious, Watson observed, reaching for his teacup. A midnight benefactor with a passion for horticulture. Indeed. The professor continues, what makes this particularly mysterious is the level of expertise displayed. Whoever our nocturnal gardener might be possesses knowledge that rivals my own. They understand which plants require specific soil conditions, which combinations create the most harmonious growing environments, and how to encourage blooms that typically take months of careful cultivation to achieve. I set down the first page and picked up the second. The mystery deepens, Watson. Most remarkably, Mrs. Pembroke's rose garden, which had been struggling with black spot disease for 2 years, has been completely restored to health using what appears to be an ancient companion planting technique that few modern gardeners would know. Mr. Ashford's herb garden has been reorganized according to medieval monastery principles that maximize both growth and natural pest deterrence. Fascinating, Watson murmured. Someone with considerable historical knowledge as well as practical skill. The residents of Thornbury Lane have begun leaving small tokens of appreciation, cups of tea, biscuits, and grateful notes. These offerings are always graciously accepted, with thank you notes left in return, written in various languages including Latin, French, and what appears to be Middle English. However, no one has ever seen this mysterious gardener, despite several neighbors attempting to stay awake and keep watch. I reached for my pipe, contemplating the pleasant nature of this mystery. The professor concludes, I would be most grateful if you could help us solve this riddle, not to stop our benefactors' work, but simply to thank them properly and perhaps learn from their remarkable expertise. The entire neighborhood has been transformed into something resembling paradise, and we find ourselves sleeping more peacefully, knowing that someone cares for our little corner of London with such dedication and love. Watson smiled warmly. A mystery where everyone benefits and no one is harmed. Quite delightful, Holmes. Shall we pay a visit to Thornbury Lane? Indeed we shall, Watson. But first, let me consult my botanical references. If our mysterious gardener is using techniques from various historical periods, there may be clues in the methods themselves that will lead us to their identity. An hour later, after reviewing several volumes on historical gardening practices, we made our way through the gentle morning sunshine to Bloomsbury. Thornbury Lane proved to be a charming residential street lined with modest but well-maintained homes, each with a small front garden that now displayed evidence of masterful care. As we walked slowly down the lane, I observed the extraordinary transformation that Professor Hartwell had described. Every garden was a masterpiece of color, texture, and harmony. Roses climbed trellises in perfect spirals, herb gardens were arranged in intricate patterns that spoke of both beauty and functionality, and vegetable plots showed evidence of companion planting that maximized both yield and natural pest control. Holmes, Watson said quietly, pointing to a small garden gate. Look at this arrangement of marigolds and basil around the tomato plants. I've seen similar techniques in my military service. This is how Italian monastery gardens were organized centuries ago." Before I could respond, we were approached by an elderly woman with kind eyes and soil-stained hands, whom I immediately deduced to be an avid gardener herself. "You must be the gentleman Professor Hartwell mentioned," she said warmly. "I'm Mrs. Pembroke. Would you care to see what our midnight angel has done with my poor roses?" She led us to her back garden, where we were greeted by a sight that took my breath away. Roses of every variety bloomed in magnificent abundance. Deep red damasks, delicate pink albas, and golden yellow tea roses, all arranged in a pattern that created a natural progression of color and fragrance. "3 weeks ago, these were dying," Mrs. Pembroke said softly. "I had nearly given up hope. But our mysterious friend has used some sort of natural treatment. I believe it involves crushed eggshells, coffee grounds, and what smells like chamomile tea. The combination has not only cured the disease but encouraged blooming that I've never seen before." I knelt beside one of the rose bushes, examining the soil and the careful way the plants had been spaced. "Mrs. Pembroke, have you noticed anything unusual about the timing of these nocturnal visits? Any pattern to when the work is done?" "Now that you mention it," she said thoughtfully, "it seems to happen most often on nights when the moon is particularly bright, and always between midnight and dawn. I'm an early riser, and by 5 o'clock in the morning, the work is always complete." Watson and I spent the next 2 hours speaking with various residents of Thornbury Lane, and a pattern began to emerge. Professor Hartwell joined us for part of our investigation, sharing his detailed observations with the enthusiasm of a true scientist. "The techniques being used span centuries of gardening wisdom," he explained as we examined Mr. Ashford's transformed herb garden. "Medieval companion planting, Renaissance topiary methods, Victorian rose cultivation, and even some techniques I recognize from ancient Roman agricultural texts. Whoever our gardener is possesses not just practical knowledge, but deep historical understanding." As the afternoon wore on, I found myself studying not just the gardens, but the grateful notes that residents had left for their mysterious benefactor. The thank you responses, written in various languages and time periods, provided the final clue I needed. "Watson," I said as we prepared to return to Baker Street, "I believe I understand the nature of our midnight gardener." "Indeed? Have you identified our mysterious benefactor?" I paused by Mrs. Pembroke's gate, watching the late afternoon sun cast golden light across the transformed gardens. "I believe our gardener is not one person, but many, specifically, the elderly residents of St. Mary's Home for Retired Academics, which is located at the end of this very street." Watson's eyes widened with understanding. "Of course. That would explain the diverse historical knowledge." "Precisely. Former professors of history, botany, classics, and literature, each contributing their lifetime of specialized knowledge. Unable to sleep well, as is common among the elderly, they have formed an informal society of nocturnal gardeners, sharing their expertise and finding purpose in beautifying their neighborhood." Professor Hartwell smiled with delight. "That would explain the multilingual thank you notes and the various historical techniques. But how can we verify this theory?" "Elementary, my dear professor. We need only visit St. Mary's Home and observe the residents. I suspect we will find individuals with soil under their fingernails, gardening tools carefully maintained in their rooms, and perhaps a greenhouse or potting shed where they prepare their natural remedies and treatments." Our visit to St. Mary's Home the following morning confirmed my deduction completely. We were warmly welcomed by the director, Mrs. Catherine Woolsey, who smiled knowingly when we explained our mission. "You've discovered our secret," she said with obvious pride. 6 of our residents, former professors all, have been experiencing insomnia and feeling rather useless in their retirement. Dr. Mansfield, our former botany professor, suggested they channel their restless energy into something productive. She led us to a small greenhouse behind the main building, where we found 6 elderly academics carefully tending seedlings and mixing organic plant treatments with the precision of master chemists. "Allow me to introduce our midnight gardeners," Mrs. Woolsey said. Dr. Mansfield, Emeritus Professor of Botany, Professor Sterling, who specialized in medieval history, Dr. Blackwood, our Latin and Greek scholar, Professor Hayes, who taught Renaissance literature, Dr. Thornton, our Roman history expert, and Miss Adelaide Finch, who was one of Cambridge's first female professors of horticulture. Each of the elderly academics greeted us with the quiet dignity of scholars, their eyes bright with intelligence and satisfaction. Dr. Mansfield, a distinguished gentleman with gentle hands and a warm smile, served as their spokesman. "We hope we haven't caused any trouble," he said. "We simply couldn't bear to see those beautiful gardens struggling when we had the knowledge to help. Sleeplessness becomes a gift when you can transform it into service for others." Miss Finch, a petite woman with silver hair and remarkably strong hands, added, "Each of us contributes what we know best. I handle the practical cultivation, Professor Sterling provides historical techniques, Dr. Blackwood translates ancient agricultural texts, and so forth. We've become quite an efficient team." "But why the secrecy?" Watson asked kindly. "The entire neighborhood would love to thank you properly." Dr. Thornton, leaning on his walking stick, smiled mysteriously. "Sometimes the purest acts of service are those done without expectation of recognition. We derive our satisfaction from seeing the joy our work brings to others, not from receiving credit." Professor Hartwell was practically vibrating with excitement. "Would you be willing to share some of your techniques? The transformations you've achieved are extraordinary." The elderly gardeners exchanged pleased glances, and Dr. Mansfield nodded graciously. "We would be delighted to teach anyone who wishes to learn. Perhaps we could arrange evening seminars in the greenhouse, legitimate evening hours, of course, not our usual midnight expeditions." As we prepared to leave St. Mary's home, Miss Finch approached me quietly. "Mr. Holmes, we have one small request. Would it be possible to continue our midnight work occasionally? Not every night, of course, but perhaps once a week? There's something magical about gardening under the stars, and the neighborhood has become our canvas for creating beauty." I smiled, understanding completely. "I believe that could be arranged, Miss Finch. Perhaps the residents of Thornbury Lane would appreciate knowing their gardens are being tended by such distinguished scholars, while still preserving some of the mystery and magic of your nocturnal artistry." And so it was that the mystery of the midnight gardener was solved, not with arrests or confrontations, but with introductions and invitations. The elderly academics continued their beneficial work, though now with the full knowledge and appreciation of their neighbors. Evening seminars in the greenhouse became popular community events, and Thornbury Lane evolved into a living laboratory where historical gardening wisdom merged with modern techniques. As Watson and I walked home through the gentle afternoon sunshine, I reflected on how this case had reminded me that the most beautiful mysteries are often those where everyone involved is made better by the solution. The elderly scholars had found purpose and joy in their retirement, the neighborhood had been transformed into a garden paradise, and the bonds of community had been strengthened through shared appreciation of beauty and knowledge. "A most satisfying case, Holmes," Watson observed as we turned onto Baker Street. "No villains to apprehend, no wrongs to right, simply good people doing good work and finding a way to make it even better." Indeed, Watson. Sometimes the greatest mysteries are not about uncovering hidden crimes, but about discovering the hidden kindness that flourishes all around us, tended by gentle souls who bloom most beautifully in the quiet hours of night. The puzzle of the singing bookshop. The autumn afternoon had settled into that golden hour when shadows grow long and lamplight begins to twinkle in windows across London. Watson and I had just finished our tea when Mrs. Hudson announced a visitor, a young woman whose eyes sparkled with curiosity rather than concern, and whose arms were filled with books bound in rich leather and tied with ribbon. "Gentlemen," she said as she entered our sitting room, "my name is Miss Lydia Fairfax, and I own a small bookshop in Covent Garden called the Literary Sanctuary. I come to you with a mystery that brings joy rather than trouble, though it puzzles me greatly." Holmes gestured to our most comfortable chair, and Miss Fairfax settled herself with the careful attention of someone accustomed to handling precious things. Her bookshop, she explained, had been in her family for 3 generations, specializing in rare books, poetry collections, and literary works that fed the soul rather than merely passing the time. "For the past 6 weeks," she continued, her voice warm with wonder, "my bookshop has been filled with the most beautiful singing every evening after I close. Not the singing of any particular person, mind you, but what sounds like a chorus of voices, each one perfectly suited to the literature being sung." Watson leaned forward with interest. "They're singing literature? Poetry, you mean?" "Not just poetry, Dr. Watson, though that certainly forms part of their repertoire. I've heard them sing passages from Shakespeare's sonnets, verses from Wordsworth and Keats, even excerpts from Dickens rendered as the most melodious ballads. But what makes it truly mysterious is how perfectly each voice suits the material." Holmes steepled his fingers, his expression intrigued. "Can you describe these voices in more detail, Miss Fairfax?" "There appears to be an elderly gentleman with a deep, resonant voice who handles the more dramatic pieces. I've heard him perform Hamlet's soliloquies as if they were ancient ballads. Then there's a woman with a crystalline soprano who makes Keats's Ode to a Nightingale sound like an actual nightingale's song. A younger male voice takes care of the romantic poetry, and there's even what sounds like a child's voice that turns Lewis Carroll's nonsense verses into the most delightful lullabies." She paused to arrange her skirts more comfortably, then continued with growing enthusiasm. "But here's what makes it truly mysterious, gentlemen. They seem to know exactly which books have been sold that day and which new ones have arrived. If I acquire a first edition of Byron, they'll sing 'She Walks in Beauty' that very evening. When I sold my last copy of Alice in Wonderland yesterday, I heard the most charming rendition of The Lobster Quadrille echoing through the shop." Watson and I exchanged glances, both of us beginning to smile at the delightful nature of this mystery. Holmes rose and walked to his bookshelf, pulling down a volume of poetry that I recognized as one of his favorites. "Miss Fairfax, have you attempted to discover the source of these voices? Surely someone must be entering your shop after hours." "That's just it, Mr. Holmes. I've checked every lock, every window, every possible means of entry. I even spent 3 nights hidden in the shop myself, waiting to catch them in the act. But on those nights, there was only silence. It's as if they know when I'm there and choose to remain quiet out of politeness." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a small leather journal. "I've been keeping detailed records of what they sing each night, noting which books were sold or acquired that day. The correlation is perfect, too perfect to be coincidental. Holmes accepted the journal and read through several pages, his eyebrows rising with each entry. Remarkable attention to detail, Miss Fairfax. You have the instincts of a natural investigator. I'm simply curious by nature, Mr. Holmes. And I must confess, while the mystery puzzles me, the singing has brought such joy to my evening routine. I now look forward to closing time, knowing that as I walk home, my beloved books will be serenaded by voices that truly understand their beauty. I found myself charmed by the entire situation. Have any of your customers mentioned hearing the singing? Curiously, no. And I have several patrons who live in the flats above the neighboring shops. Either the singing is remarkably contained within my bookshop's walls, or... She trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. Or what, Miss Fairfax? Holmes prompted gently. Or perhaps they're being considerate of the neighbors, the same way they seem to be considerate of me. The volume is always perfect, loud enough to be heard clearly, but never so loud as to disturb anyone. Holmes closed the journal and returned it to her with a thoughtful expression. Miss Fairfax, I believe this mystery requires a visit to your establishment. Would it be possible for Watson and me to examine your bookshop this afternoon? Of course. I would be delighted to show you around. I close at 6 o'clock, and the singing typically begins around 6:30, just as the evening light is fading. An hour later, we found ourselves in the most enchanting bookshop I had ever encountered. The literary sanctuary was exactly as its name suggested, a peaceful refuge filled with the warm scent of aged leather and paper, with comfortable reading nooks tucked between towering shelves and soft lamplight creating pools of golden warmth throughout the space. Miss Fairfax led us through each section, pointing out her organizational system and explaining the history of various rare volumes. Holmes examined the locks on doors and windows with his usual thoroughness, while I found myself drawn to a section devoted to medical texts and scientific treatises. The acoustics in here are remarkable, I observed, noting how our voices seemed to resonate with particular clarity and warmth. Yes, Miss Fairfax agreed. My grandfather designed the shop with that in mind. He believed that books should not only be read silently, but also heard, that literature achieves its full power when spoken aloud. The ceiling height, the arrangement of the shelves, even the types of wood used in construction, all contribute to creating perfect conditions for the spoken word. Holmes paused in his examination of a window latch and turned to study the shop's architecture with renewed interest. Your grandfather was clearly a man of remarkable insight, Miss Fairfax. This space has been designed as a natural amphitheater, optimized for vocal performance. As we continued our investigation, I noticed something that Holmes had undoubtedly observed immediately. Several chairs arranged in a circle near the poetry section, each one positioned at an angle that suggested they were used regularly by people who knew each other well and gathered for a common purpose. Miss Fairfax, Holmes said casually, do you host any regular events in the shop? Book clubs, perhaps, or poetry readings? She smiled warmly. Why, yes, actually. Every Wednesday evening, I host a literary society called the Evening Readers. It's a small group, just 5 regular members, and they meet to read literature aloud to one another. They're all retired professionals who share a deep love of the written word. And who are these dedicated readers? I asked, though I suspected Holmes had already deduced the answer to our mystery. Let me see. There's Professor Emeritus Harold Whitman, who taught dramatic literature at King's College for 40 years. Mrs. Eleanor Blackthorne, who was a professional singer before her marriage and still has the most beautiful voice. Young Timothy Ashford, well, he's not so young anymore, but we still call him that, who teaches elocution and has a gift for romantic poetry. And little Miss Cornelia Hartwell, who's actually 73 but has maintained the most delightful childlike wonder about nonsense verse and fairy tales. Holmes sat down in one of the chairs and tested its position relative to the others. And I suppose this group is particularly fond of your bookshop? Oh yes, they consider it their second home. Professor Whitman has a key, actually. I trust him completely, and sometimes they like to come in early to prepare for their Wednesday meetings. He often stays late to help me with inventory, and Mrs. Blackthorne sometimes comes by on other evenings to browse the new acquisitions. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with satisfying clarity. Holmes stood and walked to the section where Miss Fairfax kept her daily sales records, running his finger along the shelf edge with the careful attention of someone who had found exactly what they were looking for. "Miss Fairfax," he said gently, "I believe your mystery singers are none other than your Wednesday evening readers, who love your bookshop so much that they cannot bear to limit their literary celebrations to just one night per week." Her eyes widened with understanding and delight. "Of course. They have access to my sales records through Professor Whitman, which explains how they know exactly which books have been sold or acquired. And they would certainly know the acoustical properties of the space well enough to ensure their singing doesn't disturb the neighbors." "But why the secrecy?" Watson asked. "Surely they know you would welcome their additional visits." Holmes smiled with the satisfaction of a puzzle elegantly solved. "I suspect, Watson, that these devoted readers wish to give Miss Fairfax a gift, the gift of knowing that her bookshop continues to resonate with literature and music even when she's not there. They wanted to create magic for her, the same way her grandfather's design and her own curation have created magic for them." Miss Fairfax's eyes had grown bright with emotion. "What a beautiful thought, Mr. Holmes. To imagine that they care so much about the books and the shop that they want to fill it with appropriate music. It's the most wonderful mystery I could have asked for." "Shall we confirm our deduction?" Holmes suggested. "If we wait here quietly until 6:30, I believe we'll have the pleasure of meeting your mysterious chorus." And indeed, as the evening shadows lengthened and the street outside grew quiet, we heard the soft sound of a key in the front door. Professor Whitman entered first, his distinguished figure unmistakable even in the lamplight, followed by Mrs. Blackthorne, young Timothy, and little Miss Hartwell. They froze upon seeing us, their faces showing surprise but no guilt, rather like children caught preparing a particularly elaborate surprise party. "Professor Whitman," Miss Fairfax said warmly, "I believe you and your friends have some explaining to do." The elderly professor smiled with dignity and just a touch of mischief. "We were hoping to preserve the mystery a bit longer, my dear Lydia. We've been having such wonderful fun creating musical tributes to your daily literary adventures." Mrs. Blackthorne stepped forward, her posture graceful and confident. "We noticed that you seemed to hurry home after closing, as if you don't want to linger alone in the shop. We thought that if you knew the space was filled with music and appreciation for the books, you might feel more connected to it even when you're away." Young Timothy, who appeared to be in his 60s but maintained an energetic bearing, added, "And we've been having such a marvelous time matching voices to literature. It's become quite the artistic challenge, finding just the right musical interpretation for each author and style." Little Miss Hartwell, whose silver hair was arranged in neat braids, clapped her hands together with delight. "Oh, but we do hope you'll let us continue. It's become the highlight of our week. Well, our several times per week now, and the books seem to enjoy it so much." Miss Fairfax laughed with pure joy. "Enjoy it? My dear friends, I've been looking forward to closing time every day just to walk home knowing that my books were being serenaded. You've given me the most wonderful gift." Professor Whitman bowed slightly. "Then perhaps we might make it official? We could extend our literary society to include musical interpretations several evenings per week. And you, my dear Miss Fairfax, would be most welcome to join us whenever you'd like. But I do hope you'll sometimes let me simply listen from outside," she said softly. "There's something magical about walking past and hearing literature come alive in the voices of people who truly love it." Holmes rose from his chair, clearly delighted with the resolution of this gentle mystery. "I believe, Miss Fairfax, that you have discovered something more valuable than a simple explanation. You've found a community of kindred spirits who share your deep appreciation for the transformative power of literature." As we prepared to leave the literary sanctuary, the evening readers were already arranging their chairs and selecting the evening's repertoire based on the day's sales. Mrs. Blackthorne was warming up with a few scales, while Professor Whitman consulted Miss Fairfax's sales journal with the serious attention of a conductor preparing for a performance. "What will you sing tonight?" Watson asked with genuine curiosity. Little Miss Hartwell giggled softly. "We sold 3 copies of The Secret Garden today, so I thought I might interpret Mary's transformation as a gentle lullaby. And Professor Whitman has been working on a magnificent version of Prospero's Farewell from The Tempest. We acquired a beautiful first edition yesterday." Walking home through the gaslit streets, Holmes and I could hear the faint strains of literature transformed into music drifting from the bookshop behind us. The mystery had been solved, but the magic had been preserved and even enhanced by understanding. "A most satisfying case, Holmes," I remarked as we turned onto Baker Street. "No crimes to solve, no villains to apprehend, simply good people making the world more beautiful in their own quiet way." "Indeed, Watson. And perhaps we've learned something valuable about the nature of mystery itself. Sometimes the most profound puzzles are not about uncovering hidden darkness, but about discovering hidden light, the secret kindnesses and quiet devotions that transform ordinary spaces into sanctuaries of beauty and community." That night, as I settled into my bed, I found myself thinking about the gentle voices we had heard rising and falling in harmony with the rhythm of great literature. Somewhere across London, books were being honored with song, elderly friends were sharing their love of language, and a young woman was falling asleep knowing that her life's work was being celebrated by voices that understood its true value. There are mysteries that disturb our sleep, and mysteries that ease us into peaceful dreams. The case of the singing bookshop was decidedly the latter, reminding us that the world is full of secret choirs singing praises to beauty, knowledge, and the quiet magic of human connection. The Riddle of the Vanishing Sorrows. It was one of those soft London mornings when fog drifted like silk scarves between the buildings, and the city seemed wrapped in contemplative quiet. Holmes sat by our window, observing the street with that particular stillness that indicated his mind was working on some fascinating puzzle, while I reviewed my medical journals by the fireplace. Our peaceful morning was gently interrupted by Mrs. Hudson, who appeared with our usual breakfast tray and an expression of kindly concern. "Forgive me, gentlemen," she said, setting down the tea service with her characteristic care, "but there's a young gentleman downstairs who seems to be in some emotional distress. He's asked most politely if Mr. Holmes might spare him a few minutes, and he mentioned something about people's troubles disappearing in ways that worry him rather than comfort him." Holmes set down the morning paper and turned from the window with immediate attention. "By all means, Mrs. Hudson, please show him up." A mystery involving the vanishing of troubles sounds like it might require delicate handling. A few moments later, she returned with a young man of perhaps 30 years, well dressed but with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who had been losing sleep. His eyes held the particular combination of confusion and concern that Holmes and I had learned to recognize in those who had encountered genuinely puzzling circumstances. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, extending his hand with nervous energy, "my name is Charles Pemberton, and I serve as a clerk at the Whitmore and Associates law firm in the city. I've come to you about a matter that has me deeply puzzled and, I must confess, somewhat troubled." Holmes gestured to our most comfortable chair, and young Pemberton settled himself with the careful attention of someone organizing his thoughts for a complex explanation. "Please," Holmes said warmly, "tell us everything from the beginning. Watson and I find that mysteries often reveal their solutions most clearly when we understand all the circumstances surrounding them." Pemberton took a deep breath and began. "For the past 2 months, I've been observing something at my workplace that defies logical explanation. Our law firm handles a variety of cases, but we specialize in helping people resolve personal disputes, inheritance conflicts, property disagreements, contract disputes, and the like. Typically, these matters involve considerable emotional distress for our clients." He paused to accept a cup of tea from Watson, who had taken on the role of host with his usual gentle efficiency. "However, recently I've noticed that clients who come to us in states of significant emotional turmoil seem to experience remarkable improvements in their psychological well-being, even before their legal matters have been resolved. In fact, many have withdrawn their cases entirely, claiming that their problems no longer seem important or that they've found peaceful solutions on their own." Holmes leaned forward with interest. "Can you provide specific examples, Mr. Pemberton?" "Certainly. Last month, Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield came to us regarding a bitter inheritance dispute with her late husband's brother. She was so upset during our initial consultation that she could barely speak without weeping. However, when she returned the following week, she was calm and composed, stating that she had decided the family harmony was more valuable than any monetary inheritance." Pemberton set down his teacup and continued with growing puzzlement. "Then there was Mr. James Crawford, who was embroiled in a property line dispute with his neighbor that had been escalating for months. He came to us prepared for legal warfare, but after spending an afternoon in our offices, he returned home and worked out a friendly compromise with his neighbor that satisfied both parties." Watson and I exchanged glances, both of us beginning to see the outline of an intriguing mystery. Holmes rose and walked to his desk, retrieving a notebook and pen with the methodical movements of someone preparing to record important details. "Mr. Pemberton, can you describe the physical environment of your law offices? The layout, the atmosphere, perhaps the staff who interact with these clients?" "We occupy the second floor of a Georgian building near Lincoln's Inn. The offices are quite traditional: mahogany paneling, leather-bound law books, comfortable seating areas where clients can wait or have private conversations with their solicitors. Mr. Whitmore, the senior partner, believes that a calming environment helps people think more clearly about their legal options." Pemberton shifted in his chair, his expression growing more perplexed. "What strikes me as particularly odd is that these transformations seem to occur most often when clients spend time in our main waiting area. We have several comfortable chairs arranged around a small table where people can read while they wait for appointments. There's also a lovely view of the garden square across the street." "And who else has access to this waiting area?" Holmes asked, making notes with precise strokes. Well, all of our staff, of course. Mr. Whitmore and his junior partner, Mr. Ashford. Miss Catherine Hartwell, our secretary and office manager. And old Mr. Thornbury, who serves as our clerk of records and has been with the firm for nearly 40 years. Holmes paused in his note-taking and looked up with sharpened attention. Tell me about Mr. Thornbury. What sort of man is he? Oh, he's absolutely wonderful, Pemberton said, his face brightening for the first time since entering our chambers. Probably in his 70s now, with the kindest eyes and the most patient manner. He knows every case the firm has handled for the past 4 decades, and he has this remarkable ability to remember not just the legal details, but the personal stories behind each dispute. Does Mr. Thornbury interact directly with clients? Not in any official capacity, but he does spend considerable time in the waiting area, organizing files and preparing documents. Clients often strike up conversations with him. He has a way of putting people at ease, and he's genuinely interested in their stories. Holmes set down his pen and moved to the window, gazing out at the gentle fog with the contemplative expression I had learned to associate with his moments of insight. Mr. Pemberton, have you noticed any patterns in the types of advice or perspectives that your transformed clients seem to have acquired? Any common themes in their newfound peace of mind? Pemberton considered this carefully. Now that you mention it, yes. They all seem to have developed a broader perspective on their problems, seeing them in the context of family relationships, community harmony, and long-term happiness rather than immediate legal victories. It's as if someone has helped them understand that winning a case isn't always the same as resolving the underlying conflict. Fascinating, Watson murmured. It sounds as though someone is providing these people with wisdom rather than mere legal counsel. Exactly, Dr. Watson. And what troubles me is that this wisdom seems to be reducing the firm's business considerably. People are resolving their disputes amicably instead of pursuing litigation. While this is wonderful for the individuals involved, I worry about the impact on Mr. Whitmore's practice. Holmes returned to his chair, his expression thoughtful but pleased. Mr. Pemberton, I believe your mystery may be less troubling and more admirable than you fear. Would it be possible for Watson and me to visit your offices this afternoon? I suspect that observing the environment and meeting your colleagues will provide the answers we seek. Of course, Mr. Holmes. We would be honored to have you visit. Perhaps around 2 o'clock? That's typically when our waiting area is busiest with afternoon appointments. 2 hours later, we found ourselves in the elegant offices of Whitmore and Associates, where the atmosphere of calm professionalism was immediately apparent. The waiting area was exactly as Pemberton had described. Comfortable leather chairs arranged around a polished table, tall windows overlooking a peaceful garden square, and shelves lined with leather-bound volumes that spoke of centuries of legal tradition. As we settled into chairs to observe the environment, I noticed an elderly gentleman with silver hair and remarkably kind eyes organizing a stack of files at a desk position so that he could easily see anyone who entered the waiting area. His movements were deliberate and gentle, and there was something about his presence that immediately conveyed both wisdom and compassion. That must be Mr. Thornbury, I whispered to Holmes, who nodded with obvious interest. We watched as a middle-aged woman entered the waiting area, clearly agitated about something and clutching a folder of documents to her chest like a shield. She took a seat near the window and began pacing nervously, checking her pocket watch repeatedly. Within a few minutes, Mr. Thornbury approached her with a warm smile and a gentle manner that immediately put her at ease. "Good afternoon, madam," he said in a voice that carried the soothing quality of someone accustomed to calming troubled souls. "I couldn't help but notice that you seem concerned about something. While I'm certainly not qualified to provide legal advice, I found that sometimes it helps to talk through our worries with someone who has seen many similar situations over the years." The woman looked up at him with obvious relief. "Oh, thank you. I'm Mrs. Richardson, and I'm here about a dispute with my late mother's estate. My sister and I can't agree on how to divide certain family heirlooms, and it's been causing terrible tension between us." Mr. Thornbury settled into the chair across from her with the patient attention of someone who had all the time in the world. "Family disputes are among the most painful legal matters, Mrs. Richardson. In my 40 years with this firm, I've observed that the items people fight over are rarely as valuable as the relationships they risk losing in the process." Holmes and I continued to listen as Mr. Thornbury gently guided Mrs. Richardson through a conversation that helped her see her situation from multiple perspectives. He didn't offer legal advice, but rather shared stories from his decades of experience. Stories of families who had found creative solutions to inheritance disputes, siblings who had learned to value each other more than material possessions, and people who had discovered that compromise often led to stronger relationships than victory. By the time Mrs. Richardson's appointment was called, her entire demeanor had transformed. The tight lines around her eyes had relaxed, and she was speaking about her sister with affection rather than anger. "You know," she said to Mr. Thornbury as she prepared to meet with her solicitor, "perhaps I should call my sister before this appointment. Maybe we can work this out ourselves, as Mother would have wanted." After she left for her meeting, Holmes approached Mr. Thornbury with obvious admiration. "Mr. Thornbury," he said warmly, "I'm Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We're here investigating a most interesting mystery, the case of people's legal troubles vanishing before they can be properly litigated." The elderly man's eyes twinkled with gentle humor. "Ah, I suspected someone might eventually notice. Young Mr. Pemberton has been watching me with increasing curiosity for several weeks now. So you're aware that your conversations with clients are having a profound impact on their approach to their legal disputes?" "Indeed I am, Mr. Holmes. After 40 years of watching people tear their families and communities apart over matters that could be resolved with patience and goodwill, I decided that perhaps I could serve them better by helping them see their situations more clearly before they committed to adversarial solutions." Holmes settled into a chair beside him, clearly delighted with this gentle resolution to the mystery. "And Mr. Whitmore? Is he aware of your alternative approach to client relations?" Mr. Thornbury smiled with obvious affection for his employer. "Mr. Whitmore is a wise and compassionate man who entered law to help people, not to profit from their conflicts. When I explained my observations about how many disputes could be resolved through understanding rather than litigation, he gave me his full support." "Even though it reduces the firm's business?" "Mr. Holmes, we found that clients who resolve their immediate disputes peacefully often return to us for other legal needs: estate planning, business contracts, property transactions. They recommend us to friends and family because they trust us to have their best interests at heart, not just their legal victories." Watson leaned forward with interest. "So you've essentially transformed a traditional law practice into something more like community mediation?" "In a way, yes, Dr. Watson. I help people understand that legal solutions are just one tool among many for resolving human conflicts. Sometimes the most important work happens before anyone sets foot in a courtroom." As we prepared to leave the offices, Mr. Pemberton approached us with obvious curiosity about our findings. "Well, Mr. Holmes, Have you solved the mystery of our vanishing sorrows?" Holmes smiled warmly. "Indeed we have, Mr. Pemberton. Your mysterious benefactor is none other than Mr. Thornbury, who has been using his decades of experience and natural wisdom to help people see their conflicts from broader perspectives before they become entrenched in adversarial positions." Pemberton's face lit up with understanding and admiration. "Of course. I should have realized that someone with his experience would naturally develop insights about human nature and conflict resolution. And I believe," Holmes continued, "that rather than worrying about the impact on the firm's business, you might consider how Mr. Thornbury's approach could be formalized and expanded. There are many law firms that would benefit from having someone who specializes in helping clients explore all their options before committing to litigation." Mr. Thornbury overheard our conversation and approached with his characteristic gentle manner. "Mr. Pemberton, I hope you won't think less of me for interfering with the traditional practice of law." "Think less of you?" Pemberton replied with obvious emotion. "Mr. Thornbury, I think what you're doing is remarkable. You're helping people find peace and preserve relationships while still ensuring they get the legal guidance they need." As we walked home through the peaceful afternoon streets, Holmes and I reflected on this gentle mystery and its equally gentle resolution. "Another case without villains, Holmes," I observed contentedly. "Simply good people finding ways to make the world a little more peaceful and understanding." "Indeed, Watson. Mr. Thornbury has discovered something that many legal professionals never learn, that the most successful resolution to any dispute is one that leaves all parties feeling heard, understood, and respected." We paused at the corner of Baker Street, watching the late afternoon light cast golden shadows across the cobblestones. Somewhere behind us, in the offices of Whitmore and Associates, an elderly clerk was continuing his quiet mission of helping people transform their conflicts into opportunities for understanding and growth. "I find myself wondering, Holmes, how many other Mr. Thornburys there might be throughout London. People quietly working to resolve rather than escalate the conflicts that come their way." Holmes smiled as we climbed the stairs to our familiar chambers. "Perhaps, Watson, that's the most beautiful mystery of all, discovering how many people dedicate their lives to vanishing sorrows rather than perpetuating them. Mr. Thornbury has shown us that sometimes the greatest legal victory is the case that never needs to go to court." That evening, as we settled into our chairs by the fire, I found myself thinking about the transformed faces we had seen in that law office waiting room. People arriving with clenched jaws and worried eyes, then leaving with relaxed shoulders and peaceful expressions. There was something profoundly satisfying about a mystery where the solution revealed not hidden crimes, but hidden kindness, not secret schemes for gain, but secret efforts to heal. The fog had lifted completely by the time we retired for the night, leaving the street outside our window clear and peaceful under the gentle glow of the gas lamps. And somewhere across London, people who might have spent their evening plotting legal strategies were instead calling estranged family members, writing letters of reconciliation, and discovering that the most valuable victories are often the battles we choose not to fight. Sleep came easily that night, filled with dreams of wise elderly clerks, peaceful law offices, and the gentle sound of sorrows vanishing into the London mist, leaving behind only understanding, forgiveness, and the quiet satisfaction of conflicts resolved through wisdom rather than warfare. These four gentle mysteries of Sherlock Holmes remind us that not all puzzles require dramatic solutions, and not all adventures need to end with chases or confrontations. Sometimes the most profound mysteries are about the quiet kindnesses that surround us, the secret acts of service that make our world more beautiful, and the gentle souls who dedicate their lives to creating peace rather than pursuing victory. As you drift into peaceful sleep, may your dreams be filled with midnight gardeners, singing scholars, wise clerks, and the comforting knowledge that somewhere in the world, people are working quietly to solve the gentle mysteries of human kindness. Sleep well, dear listener. Tomorrow's mysteries can wait until tomorrow.